Welcome to session 6 of our relationship series. You have been learning how to run your relationship with the relationship attachment model. It describes the major bonds in your relationship and provides an outline for how to have huddles. These are so important. They are your planning meetings. And remember, we said huddles should not be more than 20 minutes, and you should try to keep them positive.
And because of 5 steps, just walk through the RAM, we can review huddles and the RAM together right now. Step 1 of a huddle is to catch up on your busy lives. This applies the know. How are you doing in this area? Are there things that need to be talked about that have slipped through the cracks? Are you keeping regular talk times?
The second step is called the patch-up. This addresses the importance of the bond of trust. So are there any conflicts or misunderstandings that you need to patch up?
Yeah, and because trust has to do with what you think of your partner, what you focus on, your attitude toward your partner, you should really express right there in your huddle what you appreciate about your partner by saying, "This is how you have blessed me."
Yeah, so the first 2 steps kind of look back on your relationship and see how things have been going, while the next steps look forward. So this third step of the huddle is called Dream Up, and it looks into the ways you rely on each other for working together and meeting each other's needs.
The 4th step of your huddle is called Back Up, and it's having to do with your commitment in a very practical way. You are to look at your calendars, what things are coming up, and how can you best support each other. It really is the practicing and strengthening of your commitment in a very practical way. And finally, the 5th step of your huddle is called Build Up, and it has to do with how you specifically are doing in your physical relationship. How are you showing your love, your affection? How are you doing in your sexual intimacy? And even though some of this was talked through in the Dream Up step, your physical and sexual closeness is really so important, and it is so good to be comfortable with talking openly about this area of your relationship.
So now we have come to the last session of our series on your marriage relationship and the final bond described in the RAM, your physical and sexual relationship.
Yeah, and I know what some of you are thinking. We had to endure 5 sessions just to get to touch. But listen, not all touch is sexual, okay?
Yeah, I mean, a little conversation can go a long way. And actually, this is a really good place to begin. There's affectionate and supportive touch, like holding hands or snuggling on a couch.
And then there's that kind of playful, flirtatious touch that isn't looking to go anywhere, but just let your partner know that you still are so attracted to them.
So listen, touch, like the other areas in the RAM, is bonding, and therefore so vital to your relationship.
So I go over to her house. It's the first time I'm there. I'm wearing these green corduroy pants, and she's got her hand on my leg, and she's going, "Oh, these feel really nice." And I'm thinking, okay, that was. Yeah.
Edit that.
Yeah, you'd want to edit that.
When she's washing the dishes, I'll approach behind her and give her a kiss on the cheek, or whisper silly things in her ear, like really silly things in her ear.
Just being dumb, but it's funny.
She likes it, especially if it's more of a public display. So if I put my arm around her, if we're walking somewhere, that means a lot to her that, I'm thinking about her, and that's kind of our flirtatious thing.
This is affectionate touch for her. She like going up the stairs, she likes to poke me in the butt, going up the stairs. So oftentimes if I'm not in the mood for that, I have to be like, "No, you go first up the stairs," and we argue about who's gonna go first.
Tori and I keep our spark going by, in my side, just continuing to give her those unspoken things that she needs to feel full, to feel good about herself. I've come to find that pays off for me in terms of keeping the spark alive.
Leonard is always doing flirtatious touch all the time. In the kitchen, at home, in front of the kids, in the parking lot, in the shops. And it's fun. Our kids thinks it's disgusting. They're embarrassed by it.
And when our children were small, Lynn had read somewhere this idea of scheduling times of intimacy, and we did exactly that. We had, well, Tuesday and Saturday night actually, but
You know, there's just no denying that touch is so bonding.
Yeah, I mean, in fact, even biological studies have clearly established the power of the bond of physical touch. For example, there's this chemical in the brain called oxytocin that's released during physical touch that generates emotional bonding.
Yeah, you're so right about that. The original studies on oxytocin were related to birthing. And they found that as a mother was giving birth, her brain actually flooded with this chemical and put her in a bonding state so that when she had skin-to-skin contact with her newborn, a bond was formed that would impact things like lessening the frequency of her postpartum depression, or the ways that a mother and baby interacted, their eye contact, less crying, overall health measures. This really changed hospital practices for delivering babies across the world.
Yeah, I mean, they used to just kind of deliver the baby and whisk him away without any interaction with the mother. Now many hospitals have adopted the practice of laying the baby on the mother's chest so they're able to be together for hours, skin to skin. And now, what is really fascinating is that similar amounts of oxytocin are released as a couple engages in sex. If you think about that, we are biologically programmed to bond when we engage in sex.
It's the biology behind the theology of what God said about marriage and sex in the book of Genesis. A man should leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife, and the two become one flesh. Becoming one happens in so many ways, but none so real as the oneness that occurs during the sexual act.
But when it comes to the sexual relationship, there are some real challenges that couples have. You know, many surveys have asked married couples what is the most common conflict they have about their sex lives. Survey says...
frequency. That just makes sense because most couples do not have the same sex drive, and they're not always on the same page when it comes to their sexual lives. And also, there are just so many things of life that can distract you and wear you out, so that by the time you have opportunity, you're just too tired. So, what exactly is the sex drive?
Well, sex drive is really all about frequency. It's the frequency of your desire for sexual activity. Now, understand that sex drive is not an either-or category. Rather, it's a range between a high drive that desires frequent sexual activity and then a low drive that's just, not in the mood as much.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. And the sex drive is not the same as sexual arousal, which is really more about intensity than frequency. We would say that sexual arousal is the intensity of your feelings of sexual excitation and stimulation. This also has a range from low to high.
Yeah, the sex drive and your sexual arousal are related to your biological makeup, but they are also influenced by your personal history and experiences, your emotional and your physical states, and even your attitudes towards sexual activity.
Which really brings us to an important point related to that principle of imbalances. If it's normal to become imbalanced in our relationship, is it also true in the same way over the course of a marriage that many things are going to imbalance our sex drive or our sexual arousal?
Absolutely, like kids, right? They have a way of wearing you out and then interrupting at the wrong times.
No doubt about that, right?
Yeah, and then there's just, daily life stresses, work schedules, illnesses, medications, hormone changes, aging, lots of things. And the answer to knowing that life will imbalance you is to be committed to recognizing it and then finding ways to rebalance those imbalances. Remember that second law of relationships. The danger is not becoming out of balance, but staying out of balance. So if you're experiencing some change or imbalance in your sexual relationship, be sure to admit it, talk about it, and work to rebalance your imbalance. If you can't figure out what's going on, seek out some professional help. But whatever you do, make sure that you're actively seeking to strengthen and realign your bonds of touch.
So let's put these two aspects of touch together, your sex drive and your sexual arousal. It seems that the lower your drive, the more you rely on participating to become aroused. I remember this couple I counseled years ago that had a real serious conflict with sexual frequency. And contrary to the stereotype, she had a much higher sex drive than he did. You talked about all of the different things that can interrupt our sex lives and marriage. Well, for them, it really was the busyness of 3 kids. And I think because his job made him change the second shift, he was not getting home till around midnight. And needless to say, their sex life suffered. She was feeling distant, detached from him. but it didn't really bother him as much. He had a lower need for sexual activity. So after talking this through, they agreed to set a schedule for their intimacy. Well, on the first night of their schedule, you can just imagine that she was waiting with anticipation. When he finally came to bed, she began rubbing his back. She told me in the next counseling session that she thought he was really getting in the mood because he was breathing so loudly, but when she rolled him over, he was really deep in sleep. So I tried to explain to him, listen, you've got to participate because you have a low drive. You can't just lay there, you have to get involved.
That's so true. You know, I think that the lower your drive, the more of a challenge it may be for you to get started. You know, it's easier to get going when you're already in the mood, but the lower drive partners need to get in the mood by easing into the sexual relationship.
So what about those high drives? What turns on a high drive partner?
A gentle breeze. But really, most things turn on a high drive partner. So this brings up a really important point. Couples need to know how their sex drives are similar and how they're different. And they gotta talk about how they like to be brought into the mood for intimacy. So there are 3 questions you should talk about in this area of initiation. The first is, how would I like my partner to approach me and initiate sex? The second is, what would I like to do with my partner to get in the mood for sex? And the third is, if sex needs to be postponed, how would I like my partner to tell me, just not right now?
There's a scriptural passage about the sexual relationship in marriage, which I think is such a good guideline, especially in light of what we have said about the common differences there are in sexual drives and the conflicts couples often have with meeting each other's needs and wants in their sexual relationship. It is 1 Corinthians chapter 7, and this translation puts it so plainly. It reads this way. Now, getting down to the questions you asked in your letter to me, first, is it a good thing to have sexual relations? Certainly, but only within a certain context. It is good for a man to have a wife and for a woman to have a husband. Sexual drives are strong, but marriage is strong enough to contain them and to provide for a balanced and fulfilling sexual life in the world of sexual disorder. The passage goes on to say, the marriage bed must be a place of mutuality, the husband seeking to satisfy his wife, and the wife seeking to satisfy her husband. Marriage is not a place to stand up for your rights. Marriage is a decision to serve the other, whether in bed or out.
That's such practical and relevant advice for a healthy sex life in marriage. So even though you have an understanding about how to say not now, those times should be few and far between.
And the emphasis on mutual fulfillment in their area of sexual intimacy was so countercultural 2,000 years ago. But God's word provides a timeless understanding of how to keep this bond of your relationship strong, even through the ups and downs of life.
I think we also need to talk a little bit about keeping romance alive in your relationship. Romance can be different to different people. So basically, I think that it's something that just becomes romantic when it's loving, it's relational, like a special gift or an action. Maybe it's thoughtful, like a surprise or having your partner do something meaningful for you. And a lot of times, romance is related to something that's aesthetic and beautiful.
That's so true. Romance definitely enhances a sexual relationship as well in marriage. And really, the sexual relationship is so entwined with the other bonding connections. If your trust drops, that will impact your sexual closeness. Or if you're not meeting each other's needs, like under that rely, or you feel a bit out of the know with your spouse, and you need to talk and catch up. These are things that oftentimes need to be done before it really feels right to step into that act of intimacy.
Yeah, I think the value of romance in marriage is affirmed by the Song of Solomon in the scriptures. It begins like a romance novel. Kiss me and kiss me again, for your love is sweeter than wine. This is one of the most vivid and detailed romantic love songs between a husband and wife, both before and after marriage. And one of the reasons why it's included in God's word is to highlight the importance of keeping the romance and excitement alive in your marriage relationship.
I know that we've emphasized that it's crucial for couples to develop a comfort zone with talking about your sexual relationship. The Song of Solomon clearly illustrates that. So if you practice talking regularly in your huddles about how you're doing in your affection, in your sexual closeness, in your romance, You will strengthen your bond by practicing this mentality of mutuality.
Well, we have now come to the end of this session and to the conclusion of our series. So to recap the main points, I would begin with saying that God wants to empower you to run your relationships and not just let them run themselves. So we have provided a plan from the Relationship Attachment Model, or RAM, for how to keep your marriage relationship strong.
And our guiding principle about relationships is that first, it's normal to become imbalanced. Many things in life will drop a level, will affect your relationship, will impact your closeness. But the danger, to cite the second law of your relationship, the danger is not becoming imbalanced. The danger is staying imbalanced.
But if you use the RAM as a GPS to locate where you are in your relationship, what is a bit out of balance, and then what would help bring this bond back up to full strength, then you will realign your relationship and avoid how a slow leak could lead to a big blowout.
So we've suggested a 5-step plan based on this RAM for your regular couple huddles. Keep them short, keep them positive, make them like a planning session, definitely not a gripe session.
And as you do these huddles on a regular basis and practice the skills we discussed throughout this series, I think you'll begin to do more spontaneous huddles right in the moment. Maybe not all 5 steps, but whatever is needed right when it's needed.
God is all about relationships, and none is really more important than your marriage relationship. When you know what are the specific bonds that make up your relationship, you are able to work together to keep them strong and growing. So remember, strong bonds will make a strong marriage.